Right now, somewhere in the world, a 3-year-old is falling apart. Not because they're spoiled, not because their parents are failing them, and not because they chose to. Their brain literally cannot stop what is happening next. And in the next 10 minutes, you are going to understand something most parents, teachers, and even some doctors have never been told. This is not a behavior problem. This is a brain problem, and it starts before most children can even tie their shoes. What if the worst meltdown you've ever witnessed from a small child was actually the brain doing exactly what it was built to do? What if the child screaming on the floor at the grocery store is not out of control, but wired differently in a way that science is only beginning to fully understand? Here's what almost no one tells you. Children with ADHD between the ages of 3 and 5 are not just having bigger tantrums than other kids. Their brains are operating under a completely different set of rules. Rules that make emotional regulation not just difficult, but biologically nearly impossible in certain moments. This is not a parenting failure. This is neuroscience. And once you see it clearly, you can never unsee it. For decades, the dominant belief about young children and meltdowns was simple. If a child melts down often, they need more discipline, more boundaries, more consequences. Parents were told, be firmer, be more consistent, set clearer expectations. And for many children, those things helped. But for children with ADHD, in this critical developmental window, ages 3 to 5, those same strategies often made things dramatically worse. Why? Because discipline assumes the child has access to the part of their brain that processes consequences. But during a meltdown, that part of the brain has gone offline. You cannot reason with a building that's on fire by showing it the fire safety manual. The old model treated meltdowns as a choice. Modern neuroscience has proven that, for these children, it is anything but. In 2007, researchers at the National Institute of Mental Health published a landmark study in the journal Times, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences**. They followed 223 children over time and mapped their brain development using MRI technology. What they found surprised everyone in the field. Children with ADHD showed a significant delay in cortical maturation, meaning the outer layer of the brain, responsible for impulse control and emotional regulation, was developing 3 years behind neurotypical children. 3 years. That means a 5-year-old child with ADHD may have the emotional regulation capacity of a 2-year-old. Not because they are behind intellectually, but because the brain's control systems are running on a different developmental clock. This study, led by Dr. Philip Shaw, became one of the most cited pieces of research in developmental psychiatry of the last 2 decades. But it didn't stop there. In 2019, a research team at Harvard Medical School studying early childhood behavior found something equally striking. They discovered that the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system in children with ADHD, fires more frequently, more intensely, and for longer durations than in children without ADHD. Think of it this way. Most children have a smoke detector that goes off when there's actual smoke. Children with ADHD have a smoke detector that goes off the moment someone even thinks about lighting a match. And the part of the brain that should say, calm down, it's fine. The prefrontal cortex is not yet strong enough in these young children to silence the alarm. The result? A full-scale meltdown that looks out of proportion to what triggered it. Because from the outside, it often is. But from inside that child's brain, the fire is completely real. Here is what nobody tells you, and this is the part that changes everything. The meltdown is not the problem. The meltdown is the solution. When a child with ADHD is completely overwhelmed, emotionally flooded, sensory input overloaded, executive function collapsed, their nervous system does the only thing it can do. It discharges. Like a circuit breaker tripping, when the electrical load becomes too much to handle, the child's system releases pressure, the only way available to a brain that has not yet developed the tools to do it quietly. They cry, scream, throw themselves on the floor, hit, or go completely silent and shut down. This is called an emotional flooding response, and it has been documented in peer-reviewed literature from the Times Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry *. Researchers found that children aged 3 to 5 with ADHD show significantly reduced activity in the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex during moments of emotional arousal. That is the specific region of the brain responsible for putting the brakes on a runaway emotional response. It's not just underdeveloped. During a meltdown, it is functionally inactive. This means the child is not choosing to continue the meltdown. They cannot stop it any more than you can choose to stop sneezing midway through a sneeze. That is the hidden truth that most people in the room, parents, teachers, grandparents, bystanders, have never been told. But here is where it gets even stranger. The very thing that makes ADHD children melt down harder also makes them capable of something most adults have lost entirely. Hold that thought because we are coming back to it. First, let's talk about what is actually happening inside a child's body in the 60 seconds before a meltdown begins. Because there is a window, and if you know how to see it, you can change everything. In 2015, researchers at the University of Toronto conducted a study that was equal parts heartbreaking and illuminating. They recruited a group of children aged 3 to 6, some with ADHD, some without. Each child was placed in a room with a toy they loved. Then, a researcher walked in and took the toy away, just for a few minutes. No explanation. They watched what happened next using biometric monitors, heart rate sensors, skin conductance electrodes that measure stress response, and behavioral cameras. The neurotypical children showed elevated stress, heart rate climbing, some frustration visible, but within 90 seconds, most had begun to self-regulate. They distracted themselves. They found another toy. Their nervous systems moved through the frustration and found a way to the other side. The children with ADHD showed a dramatically different pattern. Their stress responses climbed faster, climbed higher, and climbed longer. And critically, they did not plateau. The children without ADHD experienced the frustration like a wave that rose and fell. The children with ADHD experienced it like a wave that kept rising. Their heart rates were still elevated 6 minutes later. Their skin conductance, a direct measure of emotional arousal, remained high even after the toy was returned. One 3-year-old boy in the study sat on the floor, rocking slightly, for 4 full minutes after getting his toy back, still unable to bring his nervous system down. He wasn't being dramatic. He was stranded inside his own biology. The researchers concluded that children with ADHD do not simply have stronger emotions. They have slower emotional recovery, a concept called emotion dysregulation persistence, meaning the storm takes longer to arrive, longer to peak, and vastly longer to clear. Dr. Russell Barkley, one of the world's leading experts on ADHD, and author of Time's Taking Charge of ADHD*, has described this as one of the most under-recognized and undertreated aspects of the condition in young children. He writes that emotional dysregulation may actually be more impairing in daily life than the attention deficits the disorder is named for. Now, here is why this matters to you directly and personally. Whether you are a parent, a teacher, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, a neighbor, if there is a child in your life between the ages of 3 and 5 who has ADHD, or who has not yet been diagnosed but shows these patterns, you are part of this story. Every response you have to a meltdown is either building the child's nervous system or loading it with more pressure. When an adult responds to an emotionally flooded child with punishment, escalation, or shame, the child's already overwhelmed nervous system registers a new threat. The amygdala fires again. The cortisol levels rise again. And the circuit breaker cannot reset. Research from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention confirms that children aged 3 to 5 who experience frequent shame-based responses during emotional dysregulation episodes show higher rates of anxiety, oppositional behaviors, and attachment difficulties later in childhood. You are not just observing this child. You are, in that moment, either the person who teaches their nervous system that the world is safe, or the person who confirms that it isn't. That is not pressure placed on you to be perfect. That is the profound power you hold in that moment. And knowing the science means you can use that power wisely. Now remember the thing I promised to come back to, the hidden gift inside the ADHD brain. It turns out the same neurological wiring that makes emotional regulation harder in these children is connected to something remarkable. In a 2020 study published in the journal Times Frontiers in Neuroscience *, researchers found that children with ADHD demonstrated significantly higher levels of what they called intensity of emotional experience, meaning they don't just feel bad emotions harder. They feel good emotions harder too. Joy, excitement, love, wonder, awe, these register with a depth and richness in the ADHD brain that many neurotypical brains simply do not reach with the same intensity. This is why ADHD children can be utterly consumed by something that fascinates them. It's called hyperfocus, and it is the other side of the same coin. The same brain that cannot filter out emotional noise when it is overwhelming also cannot filter out wonder when something is magnificent. These children are not broken sensors. They are high-sensitivity instruments in a world that was calibrated for average reception. The meltdowns are not a flaw in the design. They are a signal, a very loud signal, that the environment has exceeded what this particular instrument was designed to absorb quietly. Here is the critical warning, and it is one that child development specialists are increasingly urgent about. In many countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and Vietnam, ADHD in children under 5 is still severely underdiagnosed. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, the earliest reliable diagnosis of ADHD can be made at age 4, but most children are not assessed until age 7 or later. This means millions of children between the ages of 3 and 5 are living through daily meltdowns and being labeled as difficult, bad, manipulative, or out of control before anyone has looked at what is happening inside their brains. The World Health Organization's guidelines on early childhood development emphasize that the period from birth to age 5 represents the most neurologically formative window in human life. What happens in these years, the responses children receive, the environments they are placed in, the emotional safety they are offered, is not just shaping their behavior. It is physically shaping the architecture of their brain. Chronic stress in early childhood has been shown to disrupt the development of the prefrontal cortex, the very region that ADHD children are already struggling to develop on schedule. In other words, shame, punishment, and repeated escalation during meltdowns do not teach these children to regulate better. They make it biologically harder. This is not theoretical. This is documented in peer-reviewed literature from the Times Journal of Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics *, the Times Child Development Times Journal, and the work of pediatric neuroscientist Dr. Bruce Perry, author of Times, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog *. The window is open right now. What we do in it matters more than most people realize. So the next time you see a small child, 3, 4, 5 years old, completely falling apart in a public place, or at home, or in a classroom, and you see the adults around them growing frustrated, embarrassed, or punitive, remember what you now know. That child is not performing. That child is not manipulating anyone. That child's brain is on fire, and the part of their brain designed to put the fire out has not yet been fully built. They are doing the best they can with a nervous system that is wired differently, developing on its own timeline, screaming in the only language available to it. The meltdown is a message, and the message is, I need a nervous system that is more regulated than my own to help me find my way back. Science has shown us that the most powerful thing an adult can do in that moment is not discipline, it is presence, regulated, calm, grounded presence. Because a child's nervous system co-regulates with the nervous systems of the adults around them. Your calm is not passive. Your calm is a biological intervention. You are not just watching them fall apart. You are the ground they need to land on. And that quietly, profoundly, invisibly, is one of the most important things one human being can do for another. Now I have to ask you something. Think about a child in your life, or a child you witnessed having a meltdown that everyone around them misunderstood. Knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently in that moment? Write it in the comments, because I think you'll find that the answers look very different after 10 minutes of science than they did before. And if this video changed the way you see a child in your life, share it with someone who needs to see it too. Because the children who need this knowledge the most are the ones whose adults haven't found it yet. Next time, we are going inside the ADHD brain during hyperfocus, and what happens there is not just fascinating. It is going to completely change the way you think about attention, passion, and what genius actually looks like in a child who was told they couldn't pay attention. Don't miss it.